Thomas Frank is a YouTube creator with more than 2.75 million subscribers, and he's been creating videos for the past 10 years. I'm so excited to talk to him because he is somebody who has paved the way for the productivity world, the mindfulness world, and he is incredibly knowledgeable on how to learn better because no matter what we're doing in life, we're always trying to learn better. So, in this conversation, you'll learn how to be a better YouTuber, how to learn better, and how to be a better human being. This is my conversation with Thomas Frank. This podcast is brought to you by My First Million. My First Million is one of my favorite podcasts, and you should check it out because you'll learn about technology, the future, where the world is going from two people who have sold businesses, and it's one of my favorites. I recommend it to friends all the time, and I think you'll enjoy it too. Search My First Million wherever you listen on YouTube, Spotify, and enjoy that podcast. Thomas, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. I'm really grateful and honored that you're here. And so I'm excited to talk to you. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, happy to be here. I'm digging your studio with that backlighting.
It's pretty nice. So one thing is obvious, right? You are a successful YouTuber. You have over 2.75 million subscribers on your main channel. But I'm curious, what are some of the less obvious reasons why you've been so successful on the platform?
The less obvious ones. Oh, that's an interesting question. Yeah, I often think about this. Like, what are the secret or just the little things that YouTubers don't often talk about or don't remember when they're reminiscing about what their success was built upon? I think about this a lot because there's probably like a million little things that just added up over time, like the opposite of the 10,000 paper cuts way of dying. Like, I don't know, somehow these paper cuts make me more successful and stronger over time. So, to get the obvious ones out of the way first, I've been doing this for a very long time. And it seems like you discover people every day and they've blown up overnight. In my case, I have been blogging since 2010, podcasting since 2013, YouTube since 2014. And it goes back further than that. I started my YouTube channel in 2006 when I was 15. It was nothing serious. I was uploading like ninja fighting videos with my brother, and I had a ski mask and a fedora on, so you can tell I'm a cool guy. But there's all these little things that just sort of like helped me build skills and helped me build connections and all kinds of stuff over the years. I often think back to like I was 13 years old, 12 years old, and my brother and I would be bored, so we'd open up Microsoft PowerPoint and like bring in pictures of Zoids, which are like Japanese robot animals. And then I learned how to like duplicate layers and create armies and stuff. And I often think back to like those stupid little afternoons to basically prep me for learning Photoshop and graphic design and motion graphics and like all kinds of stuff. So a lot of it is just like a literal lifetime of exploration in video and media and graphic design that have all sort of just like unwittingly given me skills that I'm able to use in my career.
One thing that you kind of glossed over there, but is I think really important to your success is just the design background in general, in terms of, I was even watching, or rather seeing your tweets, and you would add little graphics while you're tweeting to things. And I'm like, oh, he clearly has an eye for design. And I'm sure that played a role in his success in some respect. Would you agree with that assessment? And if so, where does the design skills start for you?
Yeah, absolutely. As my friend Sam, who runs the Wendover Productions channel, would say, everything involves design. he once typoed that in like some ad copy, and we've been making jokes about it forever. But it's true. You go back and you watch like anything that Steve Jobs ever said, and he'll harp on this all day. It's just like design is everything. It's everything. And I 100% believe that. And I don't think that I'm a great designer by any stretch of the imagination, but I do understand that there are concepts where if you'd ask the average person what's good or bad about a specific thing, they may not be able to explicitly pick it out, but unconsciously they can tell the difference between, say, a design that uses optimal spacing and white space and negative space versus one that's too crowded. or, a font that is kerned correctly or not kerned correctly. Now, I have zero design background. The worst class, like in terms of grades, was art for me all throughout elementary school, middle school, high school. I was terrible at that. I do not have good drawing skills. My wife is a professional artist, and the things she's able to create just make me feel like I'm like basically a kindergartner holding one of those gigantic pencils. Um, but again, like through the little things I've had to do over the past 10 years, building my own business, often on my own, I've just learned things. And a lot of what I learned have come from observation. So, to pick one very specific example, I'm pretty good at UI design and like website design. I never went to school for that. I never studied design formally. What I would basically do is just look at websites I thought looked really good and study them deeply and ask, like, what makes this design look good versus what I'm creating over here. I remember creating the fourth revision of my website, collegeinfogeek.com, back in, I think it was 2013. This was before Figma and Sketch. I had to design it all in Photoshop. And I have these iterations of the designs that I was working through. And the first few, going back, I would be like, oh my gosh, the text is only like 3 pixels away from the edge of the box I'm putting it in. That looks terrible. And then I'd go look at a website that I thought was great. Back at the time, I think smartpassiveincome.com was one of my main inspirations. I think they had a pro designer actually create a theme for that. Chase Reeves had made the Fizzle website. I thought that was amazing as well. So I'd look and be like, oh, wait, they're putting like a good 10 or 20 pixels of padding between the edge of the box and the text there. And, oh, the line height in the font is, 1.5x or times the font size. Okay, so I'm starting to learn the language and I'm starting to learn the best practices for typography, for padding and margin and border, for web layout in general. And, you just do that over and over and over again for 10 years. As long as you're deliberate about your practice and you're looking to examples that are better than what you can currently produce, you're just going to get better naturally, even if you don't have formal education.
You learn by doing. One of the things that...
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so one of the ways in which design plays a part in the YouTube world is with titles and thumbnails. And there's a lot of creators who are creating stuff on YouTube right now who are curious, how do I get better titles? How do I get better thumbnails? One obvious answer is to just do more. But do you have any best practices you could pass along from all your time and all of your videos that you've published?
Absolutely. Literally, while we were doing sound check for this podcast, I was helping somebody with this on Twitter. Alex Lieberman from Morning Brew has got this new podcast called The Crazy Ones. And he's like, hey, I've got this thumbnail and I'm going to do the title the exact same as the text on the thumbnail. And I'm like, well, you can do that and that can work, but the title and the thumbnail are a combo. And their job is to put a question in the mind of anybody who sees that on their homepage in their feed while they're scrolling. And if you just take the text from the thumbnail and you mirror it in the title, well, you're basically giving up an opportunity to add more context or build curiosity even better. So there's one tip right there. If you're going to put text in your thumbnails, allow it to complement your title. Don't just have it mirror your title. Otherwise, it's kind of a missed opportunity. So the big overarching thing that I talk about when it comes to titles and thumbnails, and I'll reiterate this because I think I already said it, it must put a question in the mind of the person who sees that on their feed. So when the impression happens, there must be a question. And it can't just be any old question, because I can say, do you know what phlogiston is? And your brain's going to go, nope, but also I don't know what that is, so I don't care. Like, I don't care that I know what phlogiston is. If you do care, it's like what people used to think fire was made of before we understood that it's like a chemical reaction. They thought there was this magical substance that created fire called phlogiston. Well, nobody knows what that is. It doesn't connect with anything you care about, so it's not a burning question, it's a boring question. The burning question has to be something you actually care about. So I'm like, this guy has the biggest feet in the entire world. You're like, okay, I need to see that. For some weird carnal reason, I have to see that. Or whatever it is. So when you're crafting your title and your thumbnail combo, ask yourself, what sort of question does this put in the mind of somebody who sees this, and how badly do they need it answered? And from there, like, that's a guiding principle. And then it's just going to kind of feel like it's still the lottery as you're doing things on YouTube. A lot of that can be mitigated by getting very clear on what your audience wants and if need be, maybe decoupling that from what you want. So in my specific case, I'm a very technical person. I'm very interested in super nerdy things. I spent 4 months of this year documenting Notion formulas. So there was a week of my life where I was very interested in operator precedence in different programming languages. And let me tell you, my audience does not care about operator precedence in programming languages, even if they are interested in learning Notion. Maybe someday down the road, I can convince them to be interested in operator precedence, perhaps by getting them interested in writing formulas that can improve their businesses and their workflows. And then I tell you, okay, this is a requirement for being able to do that. But if it's, hey, come learn about operator precedence, nobody cares. I care about it. I think it's cool, but I went down a path that most of my audience will never go down to get there. So I have to ask myself, what is the thing that will connect with them? Best example I can give, and for people who want to, you can go just study this and copy my homework. On my main Thomas Frank channel, I've got a video called The Most Powerful Way to Remember What You Study. Very good clickbait title, and fittingly, it got like 4 million views or something like that, which is very good for my channel. I think it's like in the top 5 at least. So that video is on a technique called spaced repetition. It is a fantastic study technique, basically takes advantage of the fact that when you try to recall something, the harder it is for you to do it, like the closer it is to the point where you'd forget it, the better off, like the more it does when you recall it. So, if you had rice for lunch, like you can recall that right now. That's very easy. You're probably still going to forget it. If I force you to recall what you had for lunch last Wednesday and you're actually able to do it, you're probably going to remember it for quite a long time because that's difficult to do. But same concept, right? If I make a video called How to Use Spaced Repetition in Your Studying, that's a term that no one's heard before. So they're going to be like, well, I don't care what that is. And I've learned this. Like I had another video where I found this method for memorizing numbers, like really long numbers. And I'm like, how to use the major method to memorize really long numbers. And nobody watched that video because nobody cares what the major method is. I should have called the video How to Memorize Pi to 100 Digits. And then my friend Mike Boyd did exactly that and got millions of views on his version of the video. So I have this video, How to Use Spaced Repetition. And I go, wait a minute. Who cares about that? So let me think of a different title. Okay, what is spaced repetition? Well, it's an incredibly powerful way to remember what you study because you can combine it with any other technique. In fact, I think it's the most powerful way to remember what you study. Oh, look, people are looking for that exact term on YouTube. Powerful ways to remember what you study or how to remember what you study. Okay, so this has a lot of search volume. It connects with a lot of people who are looking for ways to improve their study habits. And it's one of those things that puts a burning question in your mind because we as humans care about the most extreme, the smallest, the biggest, the fastest, all the extremes we care about it. That's why Animal Planet had that most extreme top 10 show and it was super successful for so long. We care about that kind of stuff. So if you can inject that kind of thing into your title or thumbnail, people are going to click.
Why did you start creating in the first place?
That's a good question. I guess I see things that I like and then I want to do them. Actually, yeah, I think that's exactly what it was. So some context, I've been creating on the internet, maybe not professionally, but pretty much on a regular basis since basically I started college. And the origins of College Info Geek, which was my first successful blog, came about because I got rejected from writing for another blog. So I graduated high school right after the financial crisis, 2008. My dad lost his job. Everyone lost their job. And I'm thinking, great, I'm going to college in the worst economy ever, and there's going to be no way to get a job. So my thinking is college is going to be the most competitive, cutthroat environment ever. And if I'm not constantly working, I'm just going to get chewed up, spit out, and never get a job. Turns out that's not true. A lot of people go to college and don't really try. But it's actually it's a good piece of mistruth to believe because it definitely motivated me. So I read every college prep book in my local library. The Naked Roommate and Cal Newport's books. He had How to Be a High School Superstar, How to Be a Straight A Student, and I think it's like How to Have a Remarkable College Career. There's 3 of them. Read all those. And so I go to college, and then I take the tour, and there's these people in red polos who know everything about the college. They're doing the tours, and I'm like, hey, how do I get your job? Because I thought it was cool. And they're like, there's going to be an application process. You go through training. So I do that, and I spend the last 6 months of my freshman year going to training every week, learning not only everything there is to know about the college, but also how to answer questions from incoming students. So sort of like, I'm homesick or I don't know how to study. Like, we were trained on that kind of stuff in addition to the college specifics. So I kind of had primed myself to give college advice through reading all those books and then through taking this job. And I had also been reading basically what was the life hacker for college students back then. It was called Hack College.
Why were you so attracted to that job in particular?
A couple of reasons. I think I wanted more public speaking experience, and it was like specifically a tour guide-ish job. There was another reason though. I remember going to I don't know if it was orientation. I think it was actually a summer like mini orientation where they kind of just gave tours of everything. I think I had already been accepted to the school, and I remember. So I came from a family that was definitely middle class, well off, but my parents didn't really choose to save money for my college. Mostly my dad's decision, and I don't fault him for that, but it basically came down to, Thomas, you either need to work your way through college or get a scholarship. So I spent like literally every day in high school applying for scholarships and also working. Pretty much like my last 2 years of high school was just nothing but work in school. And so I was like, well, I'm going to go to college, and I haven't yet won a big scholarship. So my options are I'm going to have to live off campus. I'm going to have to work to pay for my dorm or my apartment. And then I'm going to have to take loans for tuition. And my thought at the time was college students can only get burger flipping jobs. I didn't know anything about other job opportunities for students. I had spent high school bagging groceries and working in a grocery store bakery and like all the crap jobs and then a little bit of tutoring on the side. So I'm like, the best I can hope for is something that isn't McDonald's. Maybe there's a student job I can get. And then I saw these people getting paid to give tours and help with orientation. So a big part of it was like, well, that's not McDonald's. And that's on campus. So if I live on campus, I can just like be at work essentially. So that was curious about that. And I also wanted more public speaking experience. But I also ended up getting a job as like a tech support person. So I was like giving tours and then also fixing people's computers and removing viruses. Quite different things.
And funny because that's where you ended up doing to this day is a combination of those two in some way.
That's true. Yeah. I guess it all kind of like came together to this sort of very technical communicator role that I find myself in. I actually drew out my career path. There's a video on my channel. I think it's called like, This Is Why You Aren't Inspired. It's a video about creativity. But for that video, I mapped out my career path, and I had like this critical path of all the classes and the jobs and everything. But then there's all these like little offshoots and loop-de-loops through like, doing a speech at this club or volunteering to shoot a documentary for this on-campus organization and getting paid $8 an hour for that. But they taught me 3-point lighting, and they taught me Final Cut Pro, and they taught me all this video stuff that helped me become a YouTuber. So all these like crazy little offshoots eventually come back around and drive you towards something that you didn't think you were going to be doing. So to get back to the origin of the blog, essentially I was reading that Hack College blog. I was super interested in basically hacking my performance as a student. And then near the end of my freshman year, they're like, hey, we need new writers. We're kicking out our founders. They're graduating and they're dumb grown-ups now. So I'm like, cool, I'm going to write up an amazing guest post and I'm going to send them my LinkedIn because LinkedIn is the hot, cool thing now, no resumes. And they rejected me. And it's funny, like the guy, Shep McAllister, I think he works for Lifehacker now or maybe something else. But he was like, yeah, that was a big mistake on my part. We eventually became friends. But I was like, well, I wrote this guest post and I don't want it to go to waste. And I know how to set up WordPress. So I'm just going to set up my own blog. And I don't have time to think of a cool name, so I'm just going with the first thing that I can think of that's available. So I call it a College Info Geek. And that was the start of it. I just sort of wanted to be one of the cool kids, got rejected, and I was like, well, you can't stop me from blogging. I'll just do it on my own site.
How long after you started the blog did you start creating videos?
4 years.
Wow.
At least seriously. I had made like a couple of one-off things. I experimented, actually before my podcast, I experimented with a video interview series. Didn't even think to call it a podcast. The funny thing, my second episode was Noah Kagan. That video's been lost to time, but I remember like Skype crashed in the middle of the interview. And when I got him back on the call, he had like taken his shirt off. So I just had like half an hour of shirtless Noah Kagan footage somewhere in an interview. So yeah, those are all kinds of like little weird things I did. But then it was 2014, and I remember a few different influential factors came into play. So I had been podcasting for a year. I was inspired to podcast because of mostly Pat Flynn and Smart Passive Income. And I had done that. And then I had noticed like, well, Pat's starting to do video. The guys who run the Fizzle blog have started to do video. And I was also inspired by this guy, Sean McCabe, who was like a hand lettering artist who got into like the online business space. He also had videos he was doing and they were really high quality. And then as a gamer, I was watching like gaming content as well. Less the Let's Plays, more like retrospectives and reviews and things like that. The type of content that uses more editing. And I was just very much enjoying watching all that content. And once again, I'm like, well, if I enjoy this, I want to try it as well. So I remember my first video, I'm like, I'm just doing this to get some additional content for my blog. I had no intentions of becoming a YouTuber. I was like, I want to have basically a cooler featured image at the top of this article, and I want it to be a video. And I even had debated hosting it elsewhere instead of YouTube. I'm like, well, YouTube I could do, but this Wistia thing over here, it does cost money, but it has like heat maps and email marketing stuff. So I almost went in a very different direction. And I built my own lights out of what turned out to be flammable materials and very hot lights. So that was a mistake. And then I built a second
Did
set.
it go on fire?
Well, I was filming my video and I didn't see fire, but I smelled smoke and I saw smoke rising up from the back of my softbox, which was like a fabric lined hamper made of cardboard that I got from Target. So yeah, I combined that with like a halogen shop light from Home Depot that got really hot. And that was a bad combination. So made my Mark II lights, which were a little bit better. I would say the jump from like first Iron Man suit to second Iron Man suit, about the same jump in quality from my first flammable insurance policy destroying light to my next ones, which are still DIY, but they didn't burn my house down so much better. And
Your next video was called How to Not Blow Up Your Lights in Flames.
how to not burn your entire apartment building down with these terrible lights. No, I think I actually did do a video going over how those lights were constructed. It was like 1,000 subscriber special or something. But yeah, I just started making videos, and I think two or three videos in, I was like, wait, this is more fun than blogging. I want to do this more. So for a
Was
while,
it because you were a better public speaker, because you were getting better reactions, you enjoyed it more? What about it made you say, this is the path that I want to go down?
it was actually the editing. So at the time, I go back and I watch my old videos, and I can see that like the public speaking is not bad. I've certainly gotten better over the years, but at the time it wasn't terrible because I could edit and I could just do takes over and over again. Weirdly enough, my first video that I consider the start of me being a YouTuber was all one take. And I guess I must have just been in a headspace where I wasn't nervous, wasn't flubbing lines. But it was really the editing that I was having so much fun with. And my biggest inspirations at the time were people like John Tron and Cat Icarus, like these gaming YouTubers who do a lot of editing and animation with their content. So that's kind of what informed my style. Them, and then Crash Course was a bigger one as well. So Crash Course is John and Hank Green. It's like school on the internet for free, and it's really well produced and has animations. So at the time I was like, this is really fun. I'm having a lot of fun bringing in animations, learning different techniques. I kind of want to create something for students to learn how to study better at the level of quality that you see on a Crash Course or a Vlogbrothers or like a JonTron Cat Icarus kind of thing. It didn't exist at the time. So I just started having a lot of fun. I didn't stop blogging, but when I got to making my video for the week, I was way more excited than when I was writing my blog post for the week.
I know that Crash Course was something that really inspired you. And then when you got paid to do your own Crash Course, it was one of your crowning achievements and one of the things you felt most proud of.
Yep.
Take me back to that moment. How did it feel to get tapped on the shoulder and say, hey, we want you on this platform, after that is one of the platforms that inspired you to start?
I mean, it was amazing. I honestly would have been stoked even if they didn't pay me. And, I'll say that publicly because I know John and Hank are the kind of people who would pay regardless. So I don't think I'm risking like them screwing over somebody else in the future because of it. But I'm trying to remember exactly how it came about. I had built a relationship up with Hank specifically, and that was kind of like a lucky break. I went to VidCon a couple years in a row, and the second year I applied for this little pilot program they were running where certain bigger YouTubers would take some time to sit down and have like half an hour, just basically consultations with smaller YouTubers. So I got paired up with Hank and also Destin from Smarter Every Day. And Hank and I had a great conversation. He basically like roasted my channel for me a little bit. And at the end of the conversation, this is now coming back to me, I was like, I'll leave you with one thing: crash course study skills. Think about it. And he's like, all right, I'll think about it. And I think 6 months later, somebody from his office emailed me and they're like, okay, we want to do it. Do you want to write it? And I'm like, yes, I will do everything. Like, I'm sure you guys want to animate stuff, but I'll write it. I will host it. I want this to be a thing in the world. This has been my dream for a very long time. And they were kind enough to say yes.
What about Crash Course were you so attracted to?
It's just, I guess it's a confluence of different factors. So it's super high quality. Like you watch it and there's like legitimate animation. They have this Canadian motion graphics team that they spend so long making these thought bubble sections that are amazing. And then they have all the other animations. So the production style and level of production quality were hugely inspirational to me. The other thing is it's all free. It's like, calculus, or I don't know if they do calculus, but chemistry and world history and biology and all these different full courses. They make them super interesting for the target audience they're trying to reach. And then it's just all free. To the point where if you're a teacher, and this inspired me too, if you're a teacher, you can download all of their videos for free and play them offline, because a lot of schools will block YouTube or have bad Wi-Fi or whatever. So we took inspiration from that, and for the longest time, I think we still have it actually, we have an Amazon S3 locker, and we'll just send that to teachers and they can download all of our content if they want.
That raises an interesting question for me in my mind. Why do you think schools block YouTube when it is quite literally potentially the greatest source of learning in human history ever created?
It's also a great source of distraction.
Yeah, that's true.
That's probably a big reason for it. I don't know, YouTube is like not always the greatest experience when teachers are using it, because most teachers don't pay for YouTube Premium. A lot of teachers don't really know how to use YouTube. Like, there's a lot of pitfalls there. So I don't know, if they can have the video inside their learning management system, then it's going to be a better experience overall. Though I feel like that's way less of a thing than it used to be. And that is mostly due to the pandemic. Everyone is learning from home. It's like, well, okay, watch this YouTube video. That's like kind of the best thing I can give you right now.
Fair. You, to me, you're probably one of the best learners in the world, it seems like, or at least learners and then showing about what you've learned and how you've learned it. And you've spent so much time on studying and techniques to memorize and techniques to understand. And I'm curious what, from your perspective, what most people get wrong about learning in general.
Most people get wrong about learning. So this is an interesting question, because I think a lot of people, if they're not explicitly trying to hack their learning, end up doing it correctly. And then the people who start to try to hack their learning, I think sometimes go down a non-optimal path. So, bar none, the best way in the world to learn anything is to be obsessed with it. Because interest is the number one ingredient in recall and in being able to apply the information you learned. If you are super interested in it, you're going to be able to recall it. Example number one I will point you to, and you probably have experience with this, Pokemon and kids. When I was a kid, I could name all 150 Pokemon. That's how many there were back then. I had all the cards. I knew half of the stats for every single one. I knew all of the card combinations. I knew all the secret locations in the game. And the reason I knew all that stuff is because I was obsessed with it. I could not stop thinking about Pokemon. And I could easily very much stop thinking about long division or who won the Franco-Prussian War or whatever else my school was trying to shove in my head and then tell me to study by just rote memorization and quizzing myself over and over again. If you don't care about it, you're going to have to work that much harder to recall it, because your brain thinks it's basically non-important information. So, obsession, interest feeds into basically how your brain tags incoming information in terms of importance. Is there a tiger looking at us in that bush right there? That's very important to remember that there was a tiger in that bush and always check the bush when we walk by it in the future. But if I just give you a random string of numbers and it's not the phone number of that really hot person you want to call later, you don't care about it. So you have to find ways to care about it. And a lot of study techniques are actually kind of predicated on this. So there's like this mind palace system that some memory experts teach. I think it's often kind of a novelty, but it can work. And basically you want to like take a number and associate it with something that you actually care about. Or you think about like all the places in your house and you think about the objects in certain places, and you might bind a number in your memory to that place. Well, that's basically just a roundabout way of taking unimportant, uninteresting information and binding it to something you actually do give a crap about. So when people, I think the biggest mistake they make when they're trying to learn is they use techniques that have nothing to do with getting them more interested in the thing they're trying to learn in the first place, which is like rote memorization or creating flashcards. And that can work, but if you can find a way to make yourself more obsessed with the thing in the first place, you often aren't going to need all those weird techniques.
Why are we obsessed with things?
Why are we obsessed with things?
Yeah, like why are we obsessed with Pokemon? Why are we obsessed with building YouTube audiences? Why are we obsessed with whatever we're obsessed with? What is at the core of our obsessions?
I don't know. The only thing I do know is we seem to be the only species that engages in what's been called the exploration-exploitation dilemma. So, most species will find a source of food or a source of resources, and that's where they go. We're kind of different. We're like, well, I've got this thing over here that I can exploit and I can get rewards from it, but I want more. I want to see what's on the other side of the mountain. I want to see what's inside or up in the sky. And we just have this innate drive to not only exploit the things we already understand and know, but to go out and see what else is out there. I think that is, if not at the core of why we get obsessed, it's at least like maybe a lens into why we get obsessed with things, because we have this innate desire to discover what we don't know already.
Okay, so let's break down the explore exploit for having a channel with 2.75 million subscribers and not posting on it, not exploiting the advantage that you have. What went into the decision to create an entirely new channel and build up the notion Thomas Frank explains, and why, instead of exploiting what was already there, are you exploring a new channel?
Yeah, so several reasons. One big reason is I guess I went through a period of burnout for quite a few years, and it was definitely on again, off again burnout, which I would mitigate with, I'd try to mitigate with vacations. I would sometimes successfully mitigate with new obsessions. If you watch my 2020 content, I definitely got inspired by my friend Matt Diavella and went in a super cinematic direction, and then kind of got bored with that. So a lot of it was like, well, I've been doing this productivity and self-development content for so long, and it's just to the point where like I don't understand what I'm building in terms of like a bigger thing anymore. When it was early, it was like, well, I want to build the best resource for college students on the internet. And then I think I did that. And there was definitely other things that we could do, and there are ways we can improve it. But I achieved a lot of what I set out to achieve. And then I started getting older, and I'm like, well, I don't really resonate with building a student-focused, only for college students resource anymore. So I kind of pivoted to general self-development and kept growing that. And I think I covered a lot of topics in general self-development. And of course, there's always other things to do, but you do enough of it and you're like, well, what else is there out there for me? And I started getting interested in Notion. I made a couple of videos on my main channel about it that did quite well. But then I just sort of had this idea like, well, what if I created like the ultimate resource for people who want to learn Notion? And the reason I decided to make a second channel for it is, if you understand the YouTube algorithm, you will understand that it's mostly based on videos, not on channels. Screen Rant is a very good example of this, because you've got, what's his name? Ryan, I forget his last name, but he has like the pitch meeting series, and they always do millions of views. And then like everything else on that channel doesn't do nearly as well, but doesn't seem to drag down the views of pitch meeting videos. And that's because the algorithm knows like, okay, well, the audience cares about this kind of content, so we're just going to keep pushing that. And it doesn't matter if the rest of the channel's content is not interesting to the same audience. So there was definitely like a piece of me that was like, well, I could just post all the Notion videos on my big channel. I've already got all these subscribers. But my thought was, number one, what if I start posting way more Notion stuff than self development stuff? At the time, a Notion video could take 10 minutes for me to film, and we could have it out in a day. I think most of our initial videos, they were out within a day because they were just so easy to edit. And at the time, my main channel content was like a month or more of production per video. So I'm like, well, people are going to think, oh, this has just become the Notion channel. I don't want that. But on the other hand, whatever channel they do land on for the Notion stuff, I want them to love the video, click on the channel, and then go, oh my God, this is everything I've ever wanted for learning Notion. And if it's mixed in with a bunch of other content, like how to, get to sleep on time and stuff, they're not going to get that immediate visceral feeling that I have arrived in Shangri-La. This is the place I have been searching for my entire life. I wanted it to be that destination. So for that reason, I created a second channel. And then to your second question, which is why did I basically abandon the main channel? That was not really on purpose. It just sort of happened. I was doing them concurrently for quite a while. Thomas Ring Explained started in 2020, and I kept making videos until early this year on the main channel. I think maybe April was my last one. And April coincided with me launching my Ultimate Brain template, which is essentially like it turns Notion into a full productivity system. So tasks, projects, notes, all in one template. That's what I've been trying to build in Notion for years. And it took years of not only feature releases, but just getting deeper into the program to understand how to do it. So I had built that template, and I'm like, maybe this does 10K a month in sales. Maybe this replaces one video a month on my main channel in terms of sponsor revenue, so I can go deeper on other videos. And then it launches and starts making 100K a month, which was like double what I'd ever made from the main channel doing sponsorships. And I'm like, oh, okay, so this is an opportunity worth pursuing, especially because I'm having so much fun with it. It's less about the money. The money's an enabler, but more about like, well, this is where my passion is. I want to wake up today, and I want to, refactor these formulas. Or I want to wake up today and I want to document how the format date and moment.js formatting works in the Notion formula editor. Like, I just love that kind of stuff. So I guess I'll make a video next week, and then next week, and then next week. And then I have these little points where I'm like, oh, it's been 5 months since I posted, 7 months since I posted, 9 months since I posted as of today. And it's just like, well, yeah, I intend to get back to the main channel, but I got to do these things first. And there's not really a downside because I don't need to run sponsors anymore.
Absolutely. Well, it's interesting you talked about burnout because I was listening to your episode with Lewis Howes, and you spoke about moving to a new location and how that was inspiring you at that time, being in a new place, going and driving to the place you were going to live and testing out a new facility. And I'm curious if that actually panned out as it was predicted that it would. You recorded the episode literally last year, so December, I assume, of 2021, and now we're in November 28th of 2022. I'm curious, how did changing locations or moving environments impact your mindset and impact your life?
It was huge. Lewis was right.
Okay,
so
and
we'll
also
get into that.
I'm about to move in the next week, and I'm curious what tips you have for somebody who's about to move.
Yeah, you're in an interesting situation because you're in Manhattan, right?
Yes.
So we'll get into that. I'll answer your first question first. It made a huge difference. So the backstory for people who don't know, I moved to Denver in 2017. I didn't move to downtown, but I moved to a fairly dense area where I could like walk to Whole Foods, I could walk to coffee shops, and I love that kind of thing. I love like walking or biking places. It's very inspiring to me. And then I had moved from there to a rental house that was still fairly within the city. And then like 2020 came, I met this guy, Charles Cornell, who's also a big YouTuber, lives in Denver. We immediately hit it off, and he's like, bro, I'm buying a house. The interest rates are so low right now. You should buy a house. And I'm a very suggestible person. So I start looking at houses, and then I start making my list of things I want in my dream house. And it's the pandemic. So one of the things that I forgot to put on my list of dream house things was be able to walk to a coffee shop. Being locked inside for a year and a half will kind of make you deprioritize that kind of thing because you haven't been able to do it anyway. So we bought a house like way out in the suburbs, like the very edge of the metro area, where the nearest, like if I want to go to Starbucks, it's basically drive or walk for a full half an hour. If I want to go to a good coffee shop, it's 8 miles away. So, it was fine. I was like interested for a while in renovating my basement and learning a lot of DIY skills. I learned how to patch drywall perfectly and how to install a lot of lighting and stuff. Like that was fun. Then
Not
I
blow
kind of
up your
got
lights,
bored with.
hopefully.
I did not blow up my lights. I did perfectly well on that. I ran Ethernet cable in my house, like basically become a construction guy. Also learned that laying baseboards sucks. So hired someone to finish that for me. But then I got to a point where like, dang, I love to like walk into a coffee shop or like go into somewhere that's just more my speed and I'm way out here. So that was kind of demotivating. And the funny thing is Charles moved again and that's what spurred me to move again. And it was like super good timing because I was convinced that I needed to stay in this house for 2 years because if you stay for 2 years, you can sell the house and keep all the profits without paying taxes up to I think it's like 250K. Well, we ended up moving just a year after buying the first house, and it turned out to be great because the interest rates shot up right after that. So all the tax savings would have been lost to a higher interest rate, and I would probably be stuck out there. So moving was great, but I remember asking Lewis, I was like, okay, you're a little older than me. I believe you've done this before. There's like this common thing that I hear entrepreneurs say where if you put your back against the wall, maybe it's like by spending lavishly on a house or something, like it's going to light a fire under your butt and you're going to work harder. And I wanted his thoughts on that. And he was like, well, I've moved 5 times since getting off of my sister's couch in Ohio. Every time has been drastically more expensive. And every time I've done it, I've made connections and I've gotten ideas and I've made so much more money that the jump in lifestyle cost is moot. And he's like, so that's my 2 cents on there. And I think he acknowledged this. I will acknowledge it again. There is such a thing as survivor bias in this world. So anytime you hear an entrepreneur saying like, I 10x'd my life expenses and that drove me to build a product that made $1 million a month. Like there's definitely survivor bias in there. Go look up the story about like the planes with bullet holes and their bullet hole locations and like the incorrect conclusions that the US government drew from that. Like, oh, let's take armor plating away from the engines because there's never any bullet holes in the engine block. That's because you never got to see those planes again. They crashed. So, there could be survivor bias. Like you might increase your lifestyle expenses and then find yourself in a horrible situation. But, N equals 1 anecdotal evidence here. I moved from my $2,000 a month mortgage to in town. It's like $5K a month now. Also had to find an office. So my expenses are significantly higher than they were before. And I got to say, that lit a fire under my butt. And that got me to finally sit down and build a product that I knew I should have been building all along. I'm going to stop procrastinating and actually freaking launch it. And then by launching it, I got data and I learned lessons and I was able to increase income. So there's something to be said for whatever it is that kind of puts that fire under you again. And I think, I don't want to say it was the expenses. I honestly think it was more just living so far away from the action in this very boring neighborhood where you don't really run into people who are doing really cool, interesting things. Like that was not the place for me. Getting back into the thick of it, near to downtown, I think that's the place for me. And I just have to be willing to accept the fact that that costs more money. And then I'm going to have to hustle to make sure that that can work.
Yeah. So going forward to tips for somebody moving, what would you say to somebody like me who's about to move?
The number one thing I'll say is, despite everything I just said, make sure that it makes financial sense. So I have this crazy budgeting spreadsheet. I would link to it, but for some reason, Google recently just flagged it. So I cannot share it right now. Hopefully they will unflag it soon. But I basically built a spreadsheet that will like do all the math by taking in my average income, average expenses on both business and personal. And then I've got formulas that calculate not only my taxes, but also like what's the percentage that you're spending for housing and car and things like that. So the big thing is just like make sure that your housing and car expenses together aren't going over hopefully 35% of your income. I realize that, for people in my generation and younger, that's often easier said than done with stagnant wages and crazy rents. But
How'd you come to 35%, by the way?
I think that's like a general personal finance rule where like you want your overall housing expenses to, they often say 30. And I think 30 is just like wishful thinking for people these days. Rents are crazy, salaries are low, like it sucks. But I think the spirit of the recommendations should still be considered. Like, don't overextend because then you find yourself in a situation where you're now on the hook for this illiquid asset and your income could dry up overnight. When I moved, it wasn't like, LOL, I've got nothing in the bank. Jesus, take the wheel. I'm going to get this crazy house. Like, no, I had a decent amount of runway. And also, like, the housing market here is crazy. So it was like more of a calculated bet where it's like, if I move here, it's not, I literally go bankrupt if things go wrong. It's, okay, I got to sell the house and move again. And that would suck. And I don't want that to happen, but I won't financially ruin myself. So make sure that you can financially recover from whatever move you decide to make. Run the numbers on it. And I'm guessing that you're not buying, so you're probably not like buying into a crazy interest rate right now.
Correct. Renting.
Nobody in Manhattan buys.
Yes. Back to you. What promise to yourself this year is most important that you keep going into 2023?
What promise to myself? Oh, that's a good question. I haven't sat down and like written out year goals in a long time.
Okay, so
that's
how do you go about planning for an upcoming year? Are there any particular practices you do that have been impactful in the past? And what can people take? This episode will be published sometime in December. So I'm curious from your perspective if you have any insight on what people should be thinking about as they enter the new year.
So I almost never plan on a year scale. When I look long term, there are holistic things that I want to make sure I achieve. Like, first and foremost, make sure that I'm maintaining a great relationship with my wife and family. I look forward into the future and I'm like, I don't know exactly what I'm going to be doing, but I want to be doing something where I get to explore and learn technically difficult things and then get to share it with the world. I, derive most of my professional pleasure from being a technical communicator who gets to learn and then share what I've learned.
And you're damn good at it.
Thank you. So something that fits that criteria, I want to be doing 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years from now. And it doesn't necessarily matter what it is. I don't think I can predict what it is. 10 years ago, I wouldn't have predicted that we had GPT-3 AI now, but now we do. So 10 years from now, who knows? But I have done a lot of more 6-week or 3-month planning. And that often works really well, especially if there's some kind of reporting mechanism for it. So a couple of good examples. When I was just getting started, I had this notebook and I would write all my social stats. So it'd be like YouTube channel at 225 subscribers right now. It was September 2014. Facebook likes at this much, Twitter threads at this much. And then I would have by December 31, I want to have this many subscribers, this many Facebook followers, this many video views. And then I would just actually record the real number and check off if I had beaten the goal.
I do the same thing.
And I did that
for what it's worth
3 different
right
cycles.
Now.
Do you? Yeah, it's a great practice. And then you get to go back when you have 2 million subscribers and be like, wow, I was so stoked that I hit 1,000. And it's, I love those little milestones. In fact, Building Thomas Frank Explains, I remember Tiago Forte recently tweeted me and he's like, is it boring hitting 100K for the second time? And I'm like, no, it's awesome. For whatever reason, when you start a new project, it feels fresh and new. And you get 70 views on your first video and you're like, yes. And then you get 100 the next time. And for whatever reason, the fact that you've done millions over here doesn't matter. It's new and fresh. It's like watching a new plant grow in your garden. The tree over there doesn't diminish the excitement of watching something new grow. So that's a big thing. And I would recommend to anybody, if you care about that kind of growth in the beginning, track it for a while. And then if it gets boring after a while, stop tracking it. For me, it got boring after 1 million. It was almost the moment after 1 million, I was like, okay, well, 10 million is not exciting. Because what does it matter at that point? But up until then, it was very interesting to me, and I tracked it.
What's going on there?
With what? With 1 million? Or
with our mindset and psychological framing around after why some goals stop becoming important or why some milestones just make us uninterested in hitting the next one.
So my limited understanding of how the human brain processes numbers is that it does not really process them linearly. We think about things more exponentially. So when I hit a million subscribers, when your channel hits 10,000 or 100,000, wherever you are, you're not going to go, sweet, the next milestone is 200,000. No, your brain's going to go, the next milestone is a million, and maybe your more frontal lobe cognitive faculties will go like, well, let's get excited about 500,000. That's pretty cool, right? And you might be excited about that too, but we're really gunning for a million because it's that next factor. It's where the number really changes in size. And I think like when I got to a million, I just, call this like a lack of ambition, but I was like, I don't think that a personal development channel is going to get to 10 million subscribers. And I disagree with that now. When I hit a million, it was actually 2015. I looked back on this and I didn't realize this, but I did a million subscribers in 1 year. Or no, it was 100,000 in 1 year. It was a million in 2 years. But at the time I was like, okay, 10 million is PewDiePie territory. It's game theory territory. It's like very broad entertainment industry territory. It's not productivity stuff. Now, 2022, looking back, I think Ali Abdaal will hit 10 million at some point. If Matt keeps going, I think he'll hit it at some point. I do not personally think Thomas Frank will hit 10 million because I don't care about growing it aggressively to 10 million. I also don't want that level of fame. Another discovery this year is confirmation that I much more enjoy being relatively obscure but very well respected in my specific niche. And then I want to be able to go to the grocery store and have nobody know who I am. And, at 10 million subs, that's kind of hard as an on-camera personality. But yeah, I just think you hit a certain point where you're like, okay, the next mountain isn't worth climbing. I can see it, but it's just like the reward up there isn't worth the actual order of magnitude more effort you need to get there.
Does it bother you? How do you feel when you get recognized in public?
It doesn't bother me, but I'm naturally an introvert. So when somebody comes up and, in the grocery store, like, oh, you're Thomas Frank, like I really appreciate it, but it's a new person. And also I realize I'm being put on a pedestal in the moment. So I kind of have to go into like this professional mode, which takes energy. I'm not an extrovert, so I don't get energy from going out and meeting new people. Like I enjoy it a lot of times, but it does drain energy from me. So I would never want to be the kind of person who's getting recognized multiple times in a day. That's like my nightmare.
What's been the most surprising thing about having a massive audience on YouTube?
I have an answer for this one. The most surprising thing to me was how little your influence travels outside your niche. And this may be different for mainstream celebrities. Chris Hemsworth can go play Thor and then he can run a fitness line of products and stuff like that. And like, I'm sure that his music taste is something that people care about. But as a productivity influencer, if I tweet like, hey, drink water, I'll get like 1,000 likes on that tweet, which is so stupid. But if I'm like, hey, do you ever notice how the most successful Dillinger Escape Plan album, which is Ironworks, is also everyone's least favorite? Like, I'll get 1 like if that, because nobody cares about my taste in mathcore. Nobody cares about that. Every time I tweet about music, they're like, oh, I don't care. If I tweet a clip of me playing guitar, I'll get maybe a little bit more likes because it's me. But that was surprising. Like when I was just a nobody, I was like, oh, if you have 1 million subscribers, everyone cares about everything you have to say. You're a celebrity. And that is not true. You have 1 million subscribers who care about the thing they subscribed to you to hear about. And that's roughly it.
And that must be frustrating as you grow and change as a human being, right? Like you're inherently not the same person you were when you started, but
Yes.
people bring it up to you, your past self, as if you were the present day self, your present day self, partly because maybe somebody watched a video of you in 2014 or 2016 and they're like, wow, that's Thomas Frank today. But that's not you. That was a version of you that they just watched.
Exactly. I don't think it's that frustrating to deal with. I mean, you kind of understand like people will form a parasocial attachment to a version of you that they consume. And if they don't go to the new stuff, then yeah, I'm sure there's people out there who are like, oh, Thomas Frank is a college blogger. And they don't know that I haven't done that in years. But that's okay because, I'm doing it intelligently enough where I'm able to bring enough of the audience along with me that I don't feel like I'm just, out here shouting into the wind and angry at, my 2 million subscribers not listening to me. I recently did see there was another YouTuber who tweeted this thread, like they were very frustrated. They had many millions of subscribers, and I'm being vague because I don't want to subtweet it or anything, but way more than I have, like more than double, and they're getting like 15,000 views a video. Well, and they're frustrated by it, and like the content's good, but if you go back, like they've been on YouTube as long as I have, and the content that they were that blew up 8, 9, 10 years ago was basically for kids, and now what they're making is not the same. So it's like two different things. The kids grew up, so they're not interested in that content anymore, and they're not necessarily interested in the thing that you developed into being interested in. So that's just something that I kind of have to realize, like as a content creator, the stuff I made 10 years ago, I no longer am interested enough in that to click and watch a video about it over my lunch hour. And the people who were watching it back then, like they've grown up, they've got jobs, they're getting married and having kids now. Like I can't expect that the person who subscribed to me because I wrote about cheap textbooks is going to necessarily be interested in me talking about Notion API tutorials, So hopefully I can bring in new people to replace the people who sort of age out.
Yeah, and on that note, you have a quote at the bottom of your website on generalization, which I really admire the way in which you've used learning and used your meta skill of learning to go into so many different realms and to generalize yourself. And the quote is an amazing one that I want to read here. It's a human being should be able to change a diaper, plan an invasion, butcher a hog, con a ship, design a building, write a sonnet, balance accounts, build a wall, set a bone, comfort the dying, take orders, give orders, cooperate, act alone, solve equations, analyze a new problem, pitch manure, program a computer, cook a tasty meal, fight efficiently, die gallantly. Specialization is for insects. That's from Robert Heinlein. How do you pronounce his
Heinlein, I
last name?
think. I think it's
Heinlein?
Heinlein. I'm one of those
Yeah.
kids who grew up reading a lot, so I don't actually know how a lot of things are pronounced correctly. But author of Stranger in a Strange Land.
Why did that quote speak to you so strongly? And how has that defined your YouTube career in general?
Yeah, so growing up, I was the kid who would go into Barnes and Noble or the library, and I wanted to read everything. Like every area basically had something I was interested in. Like, oh, today I want to learn about hydroponics, and tomorrow I want to learn about Visual Basic programming, and next week it's going to be archery. Like, I just am very interested in learning. Everything seems interesting to me. So when I read that quote, I was like, yes. And that is at the bottom of what's called my impossible list, which is it's a concept created by this guy Joel Runyon. I think he graduated college in the middle of the financial crisis. So I interviewed him for my podcast years ago, and he's like, I graduated, couldn't find a job, had to sleep on my sister's couch, very similar to Lewis Howes actually. And he was like, there's all these things that I feel are impossible. So I'm going to sit down and make a list of things I think are impossible, and then I'm going to try to do them. And it's very bucket list-esque. But what I loved about his take on it was every time he'd cross one out, he'd indent under it and make like the next level. So it's like, oh, get 1,000 email subscribers. All right, well, I did that. Let's get 2,500 next. Run a marathon. Did that. Okay, well, what about running an ultra marathon? And I love this idea of building this breadth of skill, becoming like a Renaissance human being that just is capable in many areas and constantly pushing your limits in all those areas as long as you care about them. So I made my own version of the impossible list. And then in doing so, kind of kicked off this trend of other people making them. So you can Google impossible lists now. There's a lot of them. And I just kind of used that as my North Star all throughout college and a lot of my young adulthood of like, here's a lot of things I want to do: fitness goals, business goals, skill goals, travel goals. And I look back on that as kind of like a record of my life. And I love just like iterating on the next thing. So I think the most recent one was launch a product that makes 100K in sales in a month. So got to cross that off. And another thing I love doing is like having the last 5 I achieved, so I can see like, okay, what have I been doing? How long has it been since I achieved one? Am I resting on my laurels, or am I actually pushing forward? And, all that inspiration just came together. I found that quote and I'm like, that needs to go at the bottom there. I think it's also a really insightful way, or I guess a piece of advice for how to become successful in general. There's a whole book that sort of expands upon the concept. It's called Range by David Epstein. And he has this discussion about, like, I think he calls them kind and wicked fields. So a kind field is some kind of pursuit where you are always getting perfect feedback, like chess, right? You make a mistake, you exactly can see what caused it. There's no hidden information. Poker's wicked. You make a mistake or you don't win a hand, you might not know why. And with these wicked fields, we find that people who have a lot of interests, who did a lot of things growing up and then eventually niched down, tend to be more successful than people who are just doing that from an early age. So that's another thing. If you can build this breadth of knowledge and then once you have it, zero in on something, you have a lot of advantages that are going to help you excel in that one field. And I do see that it's top of the hour. So do we need to wrap up now?
Yeah, well, you've been an incredible generalist, and I'm incredibly grateful for your time today. I'm curious if you could leave people with a challenge to uh, pursue the greatest version of their life. I like to end these podcasts with the challenge because challenges are a way to take the information we've consumed to create something or to do something. Do you have a
Mm-hmm.
challenge we can leave people with?
Yeah, my challenge is for people to try out my 1% rule. And this is basically how I've built my career. This is how I've gotten over perfectionism. This is how I've built a lot of my skill. It's quite simple. Pick something you want to do. Put yourself on a schedule where you are forced to do it, either practice schedule or publish schedule if you're trying to do YouTube like me. And with each thing you do, try to get 1% better in some area that interests you. So if it is making YouTube videos like I do, maybe one week you're like, let me fiddle with the lighting and try to get a more cinematic look. Try a hair light. Next week, okay, I'm interested in text animations. So let me try that little essential animations panel in Premiere to do some text animation. And do that as long as it's interesting to you, but set up some kind of external augmentation for your discipline on that, whether it be like an app like BeMinder that actually watches you and will charge you money, or somebody who cares enough to check in on you, or a coach you hire, or an accountability group. Use that, use the 1% rule, and see where you are in a year. Because if it's weak, you're going to look back a year, you're going to have at least 52 things you've done, 52 1% improvements, and you're just going to be so much further along than you were. Doesn't matter what it is. Find a way to build incremental and regular improvement into your life.
Thomas, thank you so much for your time. I'm so grateful for you. All your socials are linked below. I appreciate all the wisdom and knowledge.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me on the show, Danny.